Who are you? What are the features that form your identity? And if you were to ask your friends and colleagues, would they think the same features that form your identity are the features you think form your identity? Do you agree on what your identity is? Or would they say something different? So these are the kinds of questions we're going to look at in this video. And they're the kind of questions we don't often ask ourselves because sometimes they seem fairly obvious. We usually ask ourselves these types of questions in a moment of what you might call crisis, when you really need to figure out who you are, maybe because this group thinks of you this way and you think of yourself differently. So you might have a situation where you think of yourself as black and others say you're not black or you're white, things like that. So we're going to talk about how identity gets formed, how it gets created, and how we fit ourselves into categories. So before, we looked at these 4 different factors that contribute to diversity: biology, culture, environment, and individual choice. And all 4 of these things also come into play when we think about identity and we shape and reshape our identities. So obviously biology gives us the basic groundwork. Biology not only forms our physical selves, but science is showing us that it also kind of nudges us in certain directions. So preferences that we have are at least partially often based on biology. So whether we have an attachment to risk-taking behavior or whether we have an aversion to risk-taking behavior, things like that, whether we like conforming to group norms or whether we don't like conforming to group norms, at least some of that has some level of biology in it. So next we have culture and environment. And these are 2 obvious things that have to do with identity, because the culture you're raised in and the environment you're raised in is going to have something to do with shaping who you become, the options that you have available, who you want to be, and things like that. So just like biology helps shape our preferences, so does culture. A culture that reinforces the idea of conformity to group norms is probably going to shape someone who has a strong preference for conforming to group norms, whereas a more small L liberal society that values individualism might nudge you towards an individualistic side of things, valuing individual freedom over group norms. And last but not least, of course, you have individual choice. And individual choice shapes identity because at certain points in our lives, we always have moments of choice about going this way or that way. Do I want to be this type of person or do I want to be this type of person? Or at very least, do I want to try to be this type of person or try to be that type of person? So when you come to ECU, as kind of a basic example, you have a choice of, do I want to really exercise school spirit and become the kind of person that has a lot of school spirit, or do I not? Or when you come to ECU, you also have, to some degree, the ability to figure out, how do I want other people to see me? And you have the ability to dress that way or act that way. And those are moments of choice that help shape individual identity also. So in order to understand how we really shape our individual identities, we have to understand a few things about humans and our abilities. The first thing is that we have what's known in the scientific community as recursion. And this means that humans are unique among animals in our ability to think about ourselves and to think about our thoughts. So whenever I think about what would I like to do today, or should I do this or should I do that, we're thinking recursively because we're actually thinking about ourselves. And not only can we think about ourselves, but we can think about ourselves thinking about ourselves. So if you think about the past and you say, gosh, I wonder what I was thinking when I did that. That was a stupid thing to do. What could I possibly have been thinking? And maybe I shouldn't think that way in the future. You are actually thinking about yourself, thinking about something. Another important thing in terms of recursion is we can also think about other people thinking about us. So when you go out on a date or you go out with friends and you think, what can I do to get this person attracted to me? Or what can I do to be cool among my friends? Or how should I behave in front of my friends? You're thinking about other people thinking about you. And you do that all the time. Whenever you get up and you think about what you should dress, how you should dress that day, you're thinking about how other people will perceive your dress. So we do that pretty unconsciously, but it's pretty important for identity. So everything else I'm going to say involves what's called the narrative theory of identity. So there are several theories of how identity forms, and the narrative theory is the one that, first of all, I think is most compelling, but it's also one that's gaining some traction in the scientific community and the community of theorists who think about identity. So everything I say from now on is going to have the vantage point of the narrative theory of identity. This is Dan McAdams, a book called The Stories We Live By. He's considered one of the founders of the theory. So if you ever have any interest in finding out more about the narrative theory, The Stories We Live By would be a good book. So we are what literary writer Jonathan Gottschall calls the storytelling animal. And this is important in terms of identity because we not only think in stories, we not only think in narratives. So when you think of history or your biography, you're thinking almost in a story form. But we also like to have stories kind of about ourselves. We like to know where we, quote unquote, come from. We like to think about who we are in relation to other people. And in order to have a good narrative about ourselves, we have to have a good model of who we are, what features we have, and also how other people see us. So if you have, let's say, if you have an alternative sexual preference, gay, lesbian, bisexual, genderqueer, whatever it is, you like to have an idea not only of what your identity is, but how other people might perceive that identity. And you know this, you can see that this is true because when you read biographies of people or autobiographies of people like, let's say, transgender people who are trying to figure out what their identity is, you can see that they become the happiest when they finally have a name for what they are, when they finally have a concept for what they are. You can think about your identity, but if you don't have a concept to describe that identity in terms that you can understand, you can't really create a story about yourself. You can't create a narrative about who you are. The same thing with biracial or multiracial people. They're usually most comfortable when they get to a point where they feel like they can kind of put a category to themselves. I'm black, I'm white, or just I'm biracial. And they get an idea not only of what that means for themselves, but what other people, how other people might react to them, because it allows them to create some sort of narrative about themselves. So when we create our identities, we're thinking not only in relation of who we feel like we are, but who we might be in relation to other people. So how do people perceive me? How do people think of me? Things like that. So once we figure out, ourselves in relation to other people, we can start thinking about the categories that we put ourselves in. So a good example of this is about the age of 2. Students really start to discover the sex that they have. So I'm a boy or I'm a girl. And around 2.5 and upwards, they start to think about the gender roles that accompany that sex. So a boy might look at, daddy and mommy and all of the boys and all the girls around them and start to get an idea of how a boy is supposed to behave as distinct from how a girl is supposed to behave. And they're going to obviously be influenced by the people around them. Mommy and daddy being the closest, but brothers and sisters and their friends and things like that. And then when they get older, they'll start to kind of, create and recreate a gender role for themselves. Of course, some boys are going to grow up and they don't really feel like they fit in that masculine gender role. So they might end up finding that they're transgender or that their idea of what gender they're comfortable in is a bit different from what they saw with daddy and the other males around, and obviously the same thing for females. But that's kind of how we start to figure out what categories we are into. Around the age of 2 and above, we start looking around us and we start figuring out, okay, what are other people doing? How can I fit into that? Where do I feel most comfortable? As far as categories go, there are a million categories that a person can fit into. Son, daughter, sister, boy, girl, masculine. In any particular area, you may be a novice, an intermediate, or an expert, or you could fit into social cliques. There's just a number of categories. And the important thing to note is that no person is only one category. Everyone's identity is a combination of categories, and also often a unique combination of categories. So I may be a son who's from Greenville, North Carolina. I'm an American. I'm a student. I'm a boy. I'm a straight, masculine male. I'm a gamer, an athlete. In my group of friends, maybe I'm a subordinate rather than a leader or a mediator. And there's a whole bunch of categories that you can have for yourself. Your skin color, the school identity that you have, the group that you hang out with. And the important thing to realize is that different categories that you categorize yourself in will become more or less relevant at different times. So let's say that you are in North Carolina. the identity of North Carolinian probably isn't going to be very important because most of the people around you are from North Carolina. But if you went to Phoenix, Arizona, the fact that you're a North Carolinian, particularly if you have an accent and other people respond to you as a Southerner or North Carolinian, that might become more relevant because you're probably one of a handful of people around you, especially if people respond to, let's say, a Southern accent. Or let's say that you are a straight male. That might not be very significant until, let's say, you are among, let's say, women who are very feminine, let's say. And all of a sudden, the fact that you're a straight male might be a bit more conspicuous. Or if you are a straight male, you might notice your straightness a bit more if you are in the presence of gay and lesbian men and women, because you being a straight male might put you in somewhat of a minority. But it also could be that your identity, that a certain category in your identity becomes more relevant because you're in a group that shares that category. So let's say that you're a gamer. The fact that you're a gamer may not be relevant in most situations, but when you're with other gamers, the fact that you're a gamer means that that's what fits you into that group. And the fact that you're a gamer becomes very relevant. Or let's say that you're an athlete. When you're among athletes, that trait might actually be more relevant because it's what includes you in the group. Whereas if you're just among your ECU friends or you're just among another group of people, that identity or that area of your identity might not be that relevant. So this is all a way of saying that the categories that are relevant at any given time are going to shift. It doesn't mean you fit into different categories at different times, but the categories that you fit into may shift depending on the needs of the situation. In terms of people being able to identify what categories you're in, sometimes they can and sometimes they can't, but there's an economic term that might be helpful here, and it's called signaling. Someone can signal deliberately or indeliberately what membership in a group they have. So if you're a Jewish male that wears a yarmulke, you, in some ways, obviously you're observing your religion by doing that, but you're also in some ways sending a signal to other people because when they see a yarmulke, they're going to kind of automatically assume that you're Jewish. When you wear a cross around your neck as a Christian, that could serve as a way to signal to other people that you're a Christian, whether it's deliberate or not. Now, when you're at an ECU football game and you wear purple and gold, that's a very deliberate way to signal to other people, I am one of you, I am an ECU fan. It's very hard to miss the idea that someone's an ECU fan if you're wearing purple and gold, and particularly ECU attire. But there are also indirect signals that you can give. So a person's skin color, of course, signifies to other people that they're a member of a particular group. And a person doesn't choose to signal their group membership based on their skin color, but it's probably going to have the effect of other people putting you into a group, whether that's for good or ill. So another non-deliberate signaling would be your sex. If you dress pretty conventionally to your sex, if you wear kind of more masculine clothes for boys or more feminine clothes for girls, and you dress and present pretty typically in terms of sex and gender, people are going to be able to kind of put you into a category pretty quickly. Okay, that's a woman I'm dealing with, that's a man I'm dealing with, and that might affect the way they deal with you. So these are all ways of deliberately or not deliberately signaling to other people what your group membership is. You can also think the same thing with clothing. So if you're a goth, you might wear a certain set of clothes. If you are a skater, you might wear a certain type of clothes that signals that you're a skater, things like that. But another thing about categories and the way that we kind of use different categories in different situations is what's called shifting. Some people call it shifting, others call it passing, some call it masking. In certain groups of people, you are going to accentuate your group membership by signaling a certain way that you might not signal another way. So an example might be if you are at ECU, you might signal your group membership by putting on ECU attire and having a lot of school spirit, where if you go somewhere else that's not ECU, you're probably not going to signal that. You might signal something else. So let's say that you're a skater also. When you're with your skater friends, you might signal your membership in a skater community in different ways. You might carry your skateboard around, you might wear a certain attire, but the way you are around ECU fans and the way you are around the skater community might be completely different. A book has been written by two sociologists about black women shifting between their white community with white friends and black community with African American friends. So when they're among white friends, and particularly white colleagues at work, they dress and they act a certain way. They de-accentuate their quote-unquote blackness. They kind of accept the, I guess, quote-unquote white social norms that govern their workplace and things like that. But when they're among African-American friends and colleagues, let's say at home, they might talk a little bit differently. They might adapt more to African-American social norms, things like that. But the idea is that they're shifting between these two groups. In one group, they present this way. In another group, they present this way. And going back to the narrative theory of identity, part of that is so that you can kind of fit into a group, and part of it is so that you can affect the stories that other people tell, even subconsciously, about you. So if you act a certain way in a white community, the white colleagues might say, okay, she's kind of one of us. And if you act a certain way among your African American colleagues and friends, those colleagues and friends might say, okay, you're acting a certain way, this means you're one of us. If you act differently, they might construct a different story that maybe is less flattering. One of my favorite quotes from a psychologist, William James, is this: properly speaking, a man has as many social selves as they are individuals who can recognize him and carry an image of him. So I want to accentuate the fact that your identity is not only something you form, but it's something other people form about you. So when we say you have multiple identities in some way, you have the way you perceive yourself, they're the way other people perceive you, and there might even be the way you think that other people perceive you. So you have a whole bunch of identities depending on the group you're in and depending on the people who are perceiving you. So let's look at this by looking at three different scenarios where you might act differently and people might perceive you differently. So there's a job interview on the left, there's an ECU football game in the middle, and there's going on a date on the right. So number one, you're going to act differently in these three scenarios. You're going to dress differently for all three. You're probably going to act differently. And when you talk about yourself or when you talk in conversation, you're going to accentuate different things about yourself. So in a job interview, it might be that you're a good worker, you're a fast learner, things like that. Those aren't the qualities that you would accentuate on a date. On a date, you'd accentuate the qualities of, I'll be a good boyfriend or girlfriend or whatnot, or here's what makes me attractive and stuff like that. And, of course, a conversation at ECU football game is going to be a lot different. You're going to accentuate the fact that you know a lot about the team and things like that. And then other people are going to perceive you differently because, quite honestly, they're looking for different things. So the people at the job interview who are interviewing you are going to be looking for, is this person employable? Is this person a potentially good colleague? The person who's out on a date with you is going to look through very different eyes. They're going to look at whether you might be an attractive boyfriend, girlfriend, mate, something like that. And of course, in an ECU football game, people are really looking to see, are you one of the ECU crowd? Are you a supporter of the team? Things like that. So not only are you going to have different identities, quote unquote, in these three situations, but other people are going to perceive you in a certain way. So that's kind of what William James means by the fact that in different situations, you're going to have, multiple identities. So that kind of wraps up the question of, how do we get our identities, how do we shape our identities, and how do we reshape our identities? So for the discussion boards and other activities, I want you to start really thinking about, what are the categories that apply to me? If other people were to ask me who I am, what categories would I list? And how am I different in different situations? How am I this person in this situation, but I act a little bit differently in these other situations based on, the social group that I'm with? Because those are all big parts of identity.